Well, thank you, Simon, and thank you to the NDN for hosting this important gathering, which is really designed to speak to the 21st century vision for the border between the United States and Mexico, to get to the actual facts about what has occurred and is occurring along the border and the progress that has been made over the past 2 years. And that will continue to be made, because I am not standing before you to say that our work is done and we're moving on to something else. The border and our presence at the border and how we deal with the border, both from a security standpoint and a safety standpoint, and from a trade facilitation, a commerce facilitation standpoint, that is ongoing work. Most of it's seated within the Department of Homeland Security. And so the efforts that the administration has put in with an additional assist from the Congress, and I'll get to that in a moment, have really allowed us to make significant leaps forward and create a border zone and think of it as a border region that is open for business, and that needs to be open for business, not just for the economy of Mexico, but for the economy of the United States. While I'll not be staying for the conversation, you're going to be hearing from some individuals who know intimately what actually is happening in this area. You'll hear from the Deputy Commissioner of the CBP, Customs and Border Protection, David Aguilar. You'll hear from the head of ICE, John Morton. You'll hear from the head of Citizenship and Immigration Services, Ali Mayorkas. You'll hear from Al Zapanta. You'll hear from Mayor Krieger, all of whom have significant firsthand knowledge of the border, of safety and security along the border, of immigration patterns along the border. You name it, they know it. They live it every day. But let me offer some remarks to help frame the conversation from the outset. We have, I think, fundamentally changed the country's approach to border security and immigration over the past 2 years. And as Simon said, we have significant, tangible, measurable results to show for it. And this leads to this statement, and it needs to be a realization in the United States and in Mexico that American border communities are safe, they are open for business, and it's important that we say that. Why? We have communities along the border. This means thousands and thousands of jobs in the United States and a huge market for products made in the United States. Now, I know this border very, very well. I was raised in a border state, New Mexico, and spent most of my adult life in Arizona until I was brought back to Washington to be a part of the cabinet. And I did not just live in Arizona. I was the U.S. Attorney for the District of Arizona. I was the Attorney General of Arizona and the Governor of Arizona. And in that capacity, dealt with border and immigration and trade-related issues virtually every day. I have walked that border, I have flown it, I have ridden it on horseback, and I have worked with border communities from Brownsville to San Diego now for the better part of 18 years. So I speak from a lot of personal experience as well as looking at the overall numbers, the metrics, the things that we need to judge our progress by. Now, I also want to say that in addition to our efforts at the border, we have made serious and significant strides with respect to the enforcement of our immigration laws on the interior of our country. And that's important because there is some connection between those two things. And so prosperity in the border region, security in the border area, a 21st century vision for the border, coupled with immigration enforcement within the United States, that is the system, that is the framework that we have developed. Now, the border is simply not the same as it was 2 years ago, or even 1 year ago, in terms of manpower, resources, and technology. And in terms of the relationships we have built with our federal, state, local, tribal partners along the border, and in terms of what we are doing with Mexico itself, particularly with the Calderon administration. This is not to say we don't still face challenges. We are, and I am, deeply concerned about the drug cartel violence in Mexico. And I think we have to acknowledge the serious nature of the battle that is going on in Mexico with respect to the cartels. We are providing as much assistance to Mexico as they have asked for, but we know that these drug organizations are seeking to undermine the rule of law in the states that border the United States, the states of northern Mexico. And that is an issue for us, as well as guarding against spillover violence of the type that we have seen plague Mexico these past few years. So that remains a continuing challenge and a continuing concern. And I'm not here to run a victory lap about the numbers, because while the numbers are significantly better, and it's time for the American people to understand that the investments we have been making along the border are producing significant and tangible results, we have to continue to make those investments, and we have to continue to sustain those efforts. But I think the amount of resources we've put at the border with Mexico shows how serious this administration is. So, given the deployment of resources, given the statistical framework, it is simply inaccurate to state, as too many have, that the border with Mexico is overrun or out of control. This statement, I think sometimes it's made to score some political points, but it's wrong. It's just plain wrong. And continuing to make these assertions in the face of everything that's happening and everything that's been done not only has negative consequences for our own border communities, but it also it disrespects the significant efforts of the law enforcement men and women we have put down on that border, who work every day, day in and day out, to make sure that we do have a safe and secure border region, and we not only have a safe border region, but we keep it that way. The reality is that many of our country's safest communities are actually at the border, and violent crime rates in border communities have remained flat or have actually fallen in the past few years. We have seen improvement in all statistical areas when it comes to border enforcement. But the misperceptions that are out there, and it's a lot easier to say the negative than the positive, but those misperceptions are hurting. They're hurting cities like San Diego and El Paso. They're hurting communities like Nogales, Arizona, who live on, work in, and need jobs in communities along this side of the border. So the mayors themselves in that area of the country, and you'll hear from several later today, have actually joined together to say, look, enough is enough. Damaging misinformation about border communities has been repeated so often that it's almost become a given in American life. Everybody says, oh, the border's out of control. It doesn't work. It's not safe. It's not secure. And that means for them they can't recruit businesses there. It means the colleges can't recruit students there. You name it. They have after effect after after effect after after effect. So while we know we continue to face big challenges at the border, while we know we continue and must continue to sustain our efforts there and be a constant presence along that border, it is important, again, to say, and I'll say it again, that the border is open for business as well. So if I might, let me give you a few of the facts about the resources deployed on the border and the efforts made to facilitate legal travel and trade and to enforce our nation's immigration laws over the past 2 years. Now, we knew at the beginning of this administration that we needed to put a framework around the border, to look at it in a fundamentally different way, and to look at it as not only a law enforcement issue, but also a commerce and job creation issue in the United States. In March of 2009, we launched the Southwest Border Initiative. We increased the size of the Border Patrol to more than 20,700, more than double the size it was just a few years ago. We doubled the personnel assigned to the Border Enforcement Security Task Forces. They're called BEST teams, which work to dismantle the criminal organizations that occupy areas alongside the border. We increased the number of ICE intel analysts along the border who are focused on cartel violence. In fact, right now, 25% of ICE's personnel are actually located right on the southwest border, the highest percentage ever. We quintupled deployments of border liaison officers to work with their Mexican counterparts. Again, it's a border. It's a relationship between two countries. It is a line, but it is also a relationship, and a lot has to happen there with our counterparts in Mexico. And we began screening southbound rail and vehicle traffic, looking for the illegal weapons and cash that help fuel the cartels. With the aid of a $600 million supplemental appropriation that the administration requested and that a bipartisan Congress passed in the summer of 2010, we have continued to add technology and manpower and infrastructure to the border. This includes, within that $600 million, 1,000 more Border Patrol agents. It includes 250 more port officers at those very important big ports along our border. It means 250 more ICE agents to focus on transnational crime. It means significant improvements in our tactical communication systems. It means at least 2 more new forward operating bases to improve coordination of our border surveillance activities. And it includes adding CBP unmanned aircraft systems. In fact, we now have, and this is for the first time in U.S. history, we now have Predator unmanned aircraft system coverage from along the entire southwest border, from the Gulf in El Centro sector in California to the Gulf of Mexico in Texas. The President authorized the deployment of 1,200 National Guard, and we announced $150 million in Stone Garden funds in 2009 and 10 to help local law enforcement along the border do its job and to pay for things like overtime. And of that $150 million, $123 million of that went to the southwest border states. So a significant add to particularly the sheriffs and the cities and police chiefs in the small cities along the border, who oftentimes don't have the tax base necessary to cover some of the operations they need to cover. These are only a few of the things, but taken as a whole, when you add them all up, it is the biggest surge of manpower and technology to the southwest border ever. And it represents the most serious and sustained action to secure that border in our nation's history. And every key metric shows that that approach is working. Border Patrol apprehensions, which is an indicator of how many people are trying to cross illegally, down at least 36% in 2 years. Name me one major American city that has had that kind of decrease in crime rate in the last 2 years. Seizures of contraband are up in all categories: illegal drugs, illegal bulk cash, illegal weapons, all substantially up. And as I said before, violent crime in our border communities has actually remained flat or actually fallen. In fact, the statistics show that these are among the safest communities in the United States. Now, as I mentioned, we've coupled that with interior enforcement, particularly of our nation's immigration laws. And we have based that enforcement on a sound prosecutorial principle. And I say this as a former prosecutor. You have to set priorities. And you have to say, what's our goal? What are our top cases? What do we want to make sure we focus on? And we have been focusing on those in the country illegally who have also been committing other crimes, who are really impacting the public safety of the United States. And so while in the last 2 years we've actually removed more illegal immigrants from the country than any 2 years prior, something that I think the public should recognize. And half of those are people who have committed other crimes as well. And as we continue to deploy a system called secure communities, that percentage of removals who are actually those who are also in our criminal justice system will only go up. In addition, we have increased or changed the way we do worksite enforcement. We really don't and stop the process of just doing the raids that generate perhaps numbers and good news stories, but didn't get at the real culprits here, and those are the employers who intentionally, knowingly go into the illegal labor market to hire their workers, oftentimes at the expense of jobs for those in the country legally, and oftentimes under conditions that were exploitive and paying wages that were far below minimum wage. So now what we do is we have greatly expanded the audits we conduct of employers, and when we find that they're not maintaining their I-9 paperwork, or they're not using E-Verify or some of the other easy-to-use processes that are in place, systems in place, then we can send in investigators to really give them a thorough investigation. So audits to investigations. What does that mean? It means we can cover far more employers, and it means that we can begin creating that culture of compliance in the employer community that we must have. Our employers need to abide by the nation's immigration laws, because the primary draw for illegal immigration into this country still remains labor, jobs, work. And so we have to get at those employers who fuel that demand side of the equation. So border enforcement sustained, substantial, ever increasing over the past 2 years. Every metric that needs to go up, going up. Every metric that needs to go down, going way down, coupled with, I think, smart interior enforcement practices and policies. And then we need to move to the trade part of the equation, because this progress on security has helped us to expand our commitment to promoting the flow of legal travel and trade. And this is a top priority, as I mentioned before. So we, through the Department of Homeland Security and also the GSA, the General Services Administration, have dedicated about $400 million to modernize the infrastructure at ports of entry along the southwest border in the last 2 years. I mean, these are big ports. Those of you who know this border know what I'm talking about. Lots of trucks need to get through there. Lots of vehicles need to get through there. Wait times need to be sustained or shortened if that border is really to work. And many of our ports were too small, didn't use cutting-edge technology, were far out of date based on the amount of commerce we needed to support. So $400 million worth of port infrastructure improvements in the last 2 years. I mentioned that Congress last summer included funding for 250 more port officers, and that was great, but if and when Congress gets to an FY12 budget, if and when, I will say when, but if and when they get to that FY12 budget, they will find that the President has actually asked for 300 more. Because the manpower necessary to work those larger ports and to move that traffic along needs to be increased. And in addition, we have added technology and K-9 teams, other things I've mentioned. But the improvements I've just mentioned, more port officers, port improvements, and the like, has already shown itself in the numbers. The total value of imports crossing the southwest border into the United States in 2010 was 22% higher than the previous year, 22%. And the number was up 40% in El Paso. It's also up in Laredo, in Nogales, and in San Diego. So commerce is going up. The community violent crime rates are staying the same or going down, and all the other metrics are as I say. But let me close with this. Two thoughts. One, I think it's important that we constantly be taking the temperature within our border communities themselves, that we not just rely on somebody on TV or somebody on the floor of the Congress or in the heat of a political campaign, not even just rely on what I would be saying, but constantly taking the temperature of our border communities themselves. And when you speak with people who live in the border, not those that are volunteering themselves for the cameras, but others, they'll tell you that they know the change. They see the change. They feel the change. And they know that this is a key priority for this administration. And we will sustain this change and this progress over the next years. But I don't want to end this talk without one last point, and that is as follows. The border is important for our country, but so is immigration reform. And I say this as somebody who, in the 90s, supervised the prosecution of well over 6,000 immigration felonies myself. I know that side of the equation as well. And we can't keep moving the goalposts and saying, well, when the border is whatever, we'll get to it. The president has asked the Congress to consider immigration reform at a bipartisan level. He has laid out an outline for what an immigration bill should look like that is comprehensive in nature and that recognizes that our nation is a nation of laws and a nation of immigrants, and these things do not have to be mutually exclusive. And so that challenge remains. And in a world where there are lots of challenges, this is one that is so very important that we not let slide or neglect with the press of other business moving forward. So the president is open for the Congress to come to him with their ideas for what a comprehensive immigration reform proposal would look like. And we will continue to work with the Congress on how those kinds of changes could be implemented as well. But in the meantime, I think it's an important message to send that we are not tarrying. We sat down from the beginning and said we want a safe and secure border zone. We want it all the way from San Diego to Brownsville. We want effective modern ports that can move traffic back and forth. We want effective control between the ports of entry, realizing you can't seal that huge geographic area, but effective control between there. We want smart immigration enforcement in the interior of our country, and that is, in fact, the package that we have been delivering. Thank you very much.